Welcome to Freethought Matters. I'm Laurie Gaylor.
And I'm Dan Barker. Is the universe fine-tuned for life, as many believers suggest? Our guest today, the astronomer Kelsey Johnson, has an answer to that question.
The Freedom From Religion Foundation, which produces Freethought Matters, is the nation's largest association of free thinkers. That's atheists, agnostics, and other non-believers. We invite you to join us in our vital work to keep our secular government free from religious influence. Become a member at FFRF.org or ask for a complimentary copy of our newspaper, Freethought Today. Freedom depends on freethinkers. Watch prior episodes of Freethought Matters on FFRF's YouTube channel.
Is the universe fine-tuned for life, as so many theologians argue? And if it is, who or what did the tuning? Our guest today, Kelsey Johnson, is an award-winning professor of astronomy at the University of Virginia. She's the former president of the American Astronomical Society and founder of the award-winning Dark Skies, Bright Kids program.
Kelsey Johnson's new book, just published late last year by Basic Books, is called Into the Unknown, The Quest to Understand the Mysteries of the Cosmos. Nobel laureate John Mather calls the book a delightful conversation with a brilliant explorer of the magic of our universe. Welcome to Freethought Matters, Professor Johnson.
Oh, delightful to see you both again.
So I think Mather is right. You've indeed written a delightful and entertaining book about physics, so dealing with some heavy topics, but you bring in a lot of humor and there's almost a chuckle on every page. It was really a joy to read. So why did you decide to write this book?
Wow, this book for me was really a labor of love. I feel like it's really important to invite everyone, regardless of their science background, into this place of existential curiosity where we can consider some of the biggest, most beautiful, most profound questions that have been, I think, vexing humanity for millennia. And I think it's important for all of us to think about those. And I really wanted to provide a book that would engage everyone regardless of their background.
In a few minutes, we want to ask you more about fine-tuning. But first, your book is called Into the Unknown. How do scientists go into the unknown?
That's a great question. I think there's a real debate among scientists about what is and isn't scientifically testable. And to my mind, something can still be considered scientific if it may not be testable today, but it might be testable in the foreseeable future with possible technologies that could come online. And so the bottom line is, for something to be considered scientific, it has to be testable. But if we're going to venture into the unknown, I think we have to keep as open of a mind as we can about what might be testable in the future and what might be provable, and in some cases, what might not be falsifiable.
I remember years ago there was a hypothesis that there might be these particles called neutrinos, which at the time was a theoretically testable thing. And now what have we found out?
That neutrinos exist. Exactly. And so often theory will provide us with a pathway to then observationally test. And so a big part of venturing into the unknown is being very thoughtful and creative with our theories about what might be possible, and then thinking deeply about what would be testable.
So aren't we talking about hypotheses, really? Going into the unknown is not just proposing some crazy thing, but a hypothesis that scientists think might be testable?
Exactly. And, I love coming up with hypotheses. And as you probably read in my book, I love crazy hypotheses because if all of our hypotheses always turn out to be true, that probably means we're not thinking creatively enough, at least to my mind. And so I'm a real fan of, yeah, let's come up with some really interesting ideas. And if they're testable, we can bring them into the realm of science. But hypotheses, that's where the good stuff is for me.
Yeah.
So you do say we need to be skeptical.
Absolutely. I think being skeptical is incredibly important. And I think there's a yin and a yang here of science. On one hand, we have to be creative and we have to think outside of the box if we want to make progress on some of the most profound questions in the universe. But on the other hand, right, we have to also hold ourselves accountable and be skeptical in the scientific sense, right? Things have to be testable. We can't just jump to conclusions that something might be true because we want it to be true. We have to hold that place of skepticism. And so there's a real balance between these two principles, I think, that propel science forward.
And skepticism isn't necessarily like a negative debunking, right? Skepticism, how would you define skepticism?
I think the word skepticism has been co-opted by modern colloquial language to mean that you're just dismissive of everything. And that's not what scientists mean when we say we're skeptical. When we say we're skeptical in science, what we mean is that we prefer there to be evidence. Tell us your crazy ideas. Let's think about them. But skeptical means that we're just not going to swallow everything hook, line, and sinker unless we have sufficient justification. So, if we think about this in terms of epistemology and what it means to know something, it's this overlap of things being true, you believing them, and most importantly for science, those things being justifiable and what counts as justification.
So to go back to the basics, how would you define science?
Science for me, if I were to define it, now you're putting me on the spot. I'm like, when was the last time I had to define science? I think I would define science as the act of empirically testing hypotheses to create stronger and stronger justifications for any given hypothesis.
And you mentioned the word knowledge, just knowledge in general. I like how your book starts off with philosophy before you get into the science. How do we know what we know? What is knowledge? What would you say knowledge actually is?
There's a big debate among epistemologists people who study knowledge. There's a debate among that field about what knowledge actually is. And so I'm a little bit of an outsider coming in here, but for me, knowledge is really an overlap between, I picture a Venn diagram. For you to know something, to really know it, one, you have to believe it, because if you didn't believe it, it would be very hard to know it. It has to be true for you to know it, but it's how do we know what is true? And so this is where justification comes in, and what counts as justification is really tricky. And at the end of the day, for me, and I know this is probably a wildly unpopular opinion because it's very impractical, I'm not actually convinced that we know anything with a capital K. That the justifications and the answers are 100% watertight. There's always a little sliver in there that we could be wrong. And that's where the skepticism comes in.
Well, that's what the word justification means. You raise it to a certain confidence level, I guess, and then what? Do we round it off? You write in your book that you question whether science can actually ever prove anything at all, like with a capital P. Why do you say that?
I do, because I think it's really important for us to be intellectually humble. And I think to be intellectually humble, we have to admit that there are many ways we could mislead ourselves, and that it's always possible. It may not be likely, but it's always possible for that next experiment or the next test of whatever kind it is to throw a wrench in the works and cause us to think whatever we thought before is wrong. And so I think we have to maintain humility about what we consider knowledge in that big bucket.
You have a chapter called What Caused the Big Bang. So I'm going to ask you, what did cause the Big Bang?
Well, the great thing is this is an unsolved mystery, and so I wish I had an answer for you, because that would help me sleep at night, because what caused the Big Bang is definitely a question that has vexed me for a very long time and actually keeps me from sleeping at night. The short answer is we don't know, right? If we are being intellectually humble, we don't know. There are good hypotheses on the table, many of them that invoke all kinds of interesting physics and different types of philosophy and different types of theology, but at the moment it's not testable. And if it's not testable, it's very hard to say which one of them, if any of the ideas we have in hand, might be right. But I think there's more to it than that, though, because even if I could tell you what caused the Big Bang, and I think, the party line in physics often is a quantum mechanical fluctuation caused the Big Bang. And to be clear, that explanation is still very much on the table, right? The creation of the universe as we know it could have been caused by a quantum fluctuation. But that kicks the can down the road, but it doesn't tell us where the laws of physics came from that enabled that quantum fluctuation. And so we end up in what's called infinite regression. And for me, this is a real philosophical knot, and it's very hard to get out of. And many people have wrestled with this philosophical knot, and many theologians in particular have used this philosophical knot as a justification for a higher power. And I'm empathetic to that. I understand why they do, but it's also kind of a God of a gaps fallacy, because just because we don't know what caused the Big Bang doesn't mean it has to be supernatural.
Is a higher power a plausible, testable hypothesis?
Well, whether or not it's plausible, I think, is not for me to answer. Whether it's testable at the moment, I think, is conclusively no. But I want to say at the moment, right? There's so much we don't know about the universe. Our knowledge, even with a lowercase k, is about the cosmos is so thin that I don't want to be the calcified old person that says that testing something in the future might be impossible. I want to hold open incredible advances in our abilities and our technology that, who knows, maybe one day it is testable, and I don't want to be the person that says it isn't.
But at this point, it's not necessarily justified, is what you're saying.
Yeah, I think, I think even theologians, if they're being honest, would admit that God isn't testable, and that's where faith comes in.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yes. I particularly like this quote from your book. Here we are with our limited brains. Do we really have so much arrogance as to think just because we don't understand something, it must be supernatural? I love that quote. Can something come from nothing? Did something come from nothing? Why did you write that?
I'm just really mindful of every time as scientists we hit what appears to be the wall of our understanding, or we hit the limits of what is currently testable. It's very tempting to assume that whatever is beyond that limit has to be supernatural. But I think there's a lot of hubris in this. I think we humans, and I don't want to speak for everyone on the planet, that would be a very grandiose statement, but I think we humans tend to think of ourselves as the apex of intellectual evolution, because here on Earth, we appear to be the apex of intellectual evolution. But I think that's very myopic. I mean, who's to say that there isn't a scenario in which we could be even more intellectually evolved? And a great way to think about this, I think, is that by analogy, we could think about chimpanzees, and our DNA is only 1.2% different than that of chimpanzees, right? That's not a lot of difference. Okay, there's a lot of DNA in that 1.2%, but it's really not that different. And yet, I think it would probably be, I hypothesize, I haven't tested this, I hypothesize it would probably be impossible to teach a chimpanzee calculus or thermodynamics or general relativity or quantum mechanics. And so if we extrapolate that and think about us as we are with our DNA and our brains, what if we were yet another 1.2% further intellectually evolved, whatever that means? I don't even know what that means cognitively. What might we be able to understand then that we don't understand and can't possibly understand now. So I want to hold space for that. I want to hold space for us not being, I would like to think that we're smart. I would like to think that we are capable of understanding everything in the universe, and maybe we are. And that's the point of science, is to try to move in that direction. But we have to hold open the possibility that maybe we're not.
But in the meantime, many of us can't help trying at least to know what we can know with this limited 1.2. We're talking with astronomer, professor, and author Kelsey Johnson about her new book, Into the Unknown, The Quest to Understand the Mysteries of the Cosmos. And when we come back, we're going to ask you, Kelsey, is the universe fine-tuned for life?
Hi, I'm Ron Reagan, an unabashed atheist.
When I first recorded that commercial back in 2014, being openly atheist in America was still fairly uncommon. Today, the fastest growing religious group in the country is the non-religious, especially among the young. That progress is heartening, but the religious pushback is fierce and the forces of Christian nationalism are well organized. Our progress won't continue unless we work together so that reason and our secular constitution will prevail. That's why I'm asking you to join the Freedom from Religion Foundation, the nation's largest and most effective association of atheists and agnostics working to keep state and church separate, just like our founders intended. Please join the Freedom from Religion Foundation today. Ron Reagan, lifelong atheist, not afraid of burning in hell.
I'm Doug Hinahara, and I'm an out-of-the-closet atheist. I consider myself fortunate in that I wasn't raised in an overly religious family, so I was allowed to think for myself. And around the time I was 17, as I was exploring these ideas of religion, I was told by a fundamentalist Christian that my grandmother, who had emigrated from Japan, was destined to eternal damnation because she was a Buddhist. And I couldn't accept that, and it kind of unraveled from there for me. So at this point in my life, I've become very comfortable with the idea that I don't need religion or belief in God to be a moral person and live an ethical life. I'm proud of the fact that I have 2 daughters who have grown up to be wonderful young women, and I'm proud to say also atheists.
Welcome back to Freethought Matters. We're continuing our conversation with astronomer Kelsey Johnson about her new book, Into the Unknown. So, Kelsey, you have a chapter in your book called Is the Universe Fine-Tuned? First, what do you mean? What do we mean by the question? What do we mean by fine-tuning?
Yeah, so if you happen to have a physics textbook on your shelf, and as I know everyone does, if you crack open that physics textbook, or open the one virtually online, you're likely to find a list of dozens and dozens of physical constants, like the speed of light, which we call the letter C, or the gravitational constant, which is denoted with a capital letter G. There are many of them. And they're often known to very, very precise values with many significant digits. And I think most normal people who are forced to use these constants probably think to themselves, someone somewhere figured them out and that's that. And they just leave it at that and they plug them into their equations. But where the rubber really hits the road here is that for a subset of these constants, many of them are related, but about 20 of them or so appear to be independent. And for these 20 or so physical constants, we don't know why they have the values that they do. And as a physicist, this really kind of irks us, right? Because we want to know why. We want to know why things are the way they are and why they behave the way they do. So we don't know why they are the way they are. But more than that is that for any of these physical constants, if you tweak them, sometimes by even just a tiny amount, and sort of put them into a toy universe and see what that toy universe would do, in the end, that toy universe would almost certainly be inhospitable to life as we know it. And so that's the gist of fine tuning is, are these physical constants so finely tuned to enable or to demand life as we know it.
So what are the possible options to explain fine-tuning?
There are, I think, many more options to explain fine-tuning than I think many people think of. I think when people often think of fine-tuning, they quickly fall into one of two answers. And I think this is an example of what's called availability error, right? We're only prone to thinking of explanations that we're prone to thinking of. And if we don't know of an explanation, we're not likely to think of it. And so the two explanations I think most people most commonly think of are, on one hand, a higher power of some kind, right? It could be a conventional God or something else we could talk about. Or on the other hand, just pure luck and chance. And there are a lot of other explanations besides that, I think, that people often don't consider as part of this conversation. And, some of them could be as prosaic as the physical constants have a reason why they have the values that they do, but it's unknown physics, and we don't know why they have the values that they do, but someday we might. Or it might be that when we think about life, and in my sentence earlier, I really wanted to stress life as we know it. Yeah. It could be that when we think about life, we are being extraordinarily closed-minded and provincial. And it could be that life of some kind, even if it's radically different from us, right? We might not even recognize it as life. It has no resemblance to life that we know. But it could be that in any universe with any set of physical conditions, or in a whole set of universes with a whole set of different physical conditions, life of some kind would emerge. And if that's true, that life and that other universe with different physical constants might be thinking the same thing we do. That how could life in any other universe with any other set of physical constants possibly exist? So, that's one of the explanations I think we really have to hold room for, because there's so much we don't understand about life.
It seems like you're suggesting a multiverse too. Wouldn't a multiverse raise the numerator? I mean, wouldn't that increase the chances?
Absolutely. And I think there being a multiverse is 100% on the table as an option. And I realize that for many people who don't live and breathe this material, thinking about multiple universes might sound as equally crazy and untestable as, for example, a higher power. But there are real physical reasons that get us thinking that multiverses might actually be expected. And if there are multiple universes, and more than just a couple, possibly an infinite number, if there are an infinite number of multiverses, one of them necessarily has to have the physical constants that we have in the universe in which we live. And so, of course, we find ourselves in that universe that has the physical constants that enable us to be there, because we have to, right? That is the principle, the anthropic principle, right? We have to find ourselves in a universe that allows for us to be there.
Well, also, it seems like we have to be talking about evolution. We
absolutely
evolved, we adapted to our surroundings.
That's exactly right, Laurie. And I think that speaks to the different forms that life could take in very different surroundings. And I think it's easy for us on our singular planet that we know to have life to have this really myopic perception about what evolutionary conditions allow for life. But we have to admit that we have one data point on one planet, and probably we're being a little bit closed-minded.
So whether or not the multiverse is ultimately testable, it's not implausible. There's nothing about it that would violate anything that we know about the laws of nature, right?
Exactly. A multiverse is, it's not implausible. It's also not falsifiable at the moment. Yeah. But there are some interesting experiments coming online that may start to be able to probe that possibility a little bit in the future.
Dan's a big cheerleader of multiverses.
Of the hypothesis.
So he likes the hypothesis. So you're finding...
it's one of those hypotheses I will admit I want to be true.
Yeah.
I want there to be multiverses because I think it would be extraordinarily cool. Yeah. But I'm also mindful that because I want it to be true, I'm prone to confirmation bias there. And so I have to be extra skeptical of myself when I'm talking about multiverses, if that makes sense. Because I agree with you, Dan. I think they would be great.
So I think this probably will be the final question, and your final chapter is, what is our place in the universe? What is our place?
Again, one of the many questions I wish I had an answer for. I will tell you, though, as I think about our place in the universe as humans, I'm really struck by a couple things. On one hand, I'm acutely aware that as of right now, we are the only sentient life that we are aware of in the universe that's capable of even trying to understand the universe. So in some ways, we're actually fluctuations of the universe made sentient. And to me, that almost comes with an ethical imperative to try to understand as much about the universe as we can. Now, in tension with that is that in modern life, I also feel that we are becoming increasingly disconnected from the universe. People hardly spend time outside at all, at least in our modern culture. They certainly hardly spend time outside at night, if to do more than, say, walk from their front door to their car. And even if people do go outside at night, they're very unlikely to even look up because there's nothing to see because there's so much light pollution. And I worry that we're becoming disconnected from the universe that is so magnificent and huge and the greatest script ever written in some sense. And I think it is doing us a disservice to be disconnected from it.
So whether we are religious or not, there's room for awe and wonder and majesty in the universe we live in.
Absolutely. And that awe and wonder is so important for human flourishing, right? We know from scientific studies and so many psychology papers the importance of experiencing awe and wonder for all kinds of things, from creativity to curiosity to pro-social behavior to ethical behavior, right? Experiencing awe and wonder is super important. And I worry that we're losing that as we become, focused on our screens and our phones and we stay inside all the time.
Well, there is a lot of awe and wonder in your book, Kelsey, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Absolutely my pleasure. Thank you.
And thank you for watching Freethought Matters.
Because Freethought matters.